Well, thanks for having me back. I can't tell you how happy I am to be here. I served on the board back in '98 through 2000. I took over as chairman of the organization called the Regional Investment Bankers Association, and I left the chairman of the National Investment Banking Association. And anyone that was involved with us back then will remember how hard a fight that was to have the name change from regional to national. But as I look back on that, it probably was one of the best things, in my opinion, that could have happened. And I came back today for a number of reasons. Primarily, though, is to say thanks to this organization. This organization spends a lot of time incubating small companies and nurturing issuers. And perhaps one of the best things that ever incubated was the career I've had since I sold my firm, Princeton Securities, back in 2000. And in the I'd rather be lucky than smart category, I sold Princeton Securities that started 13 years earlier on April 3rd of 2000. If you go back and look at the chart, that's the morning NASDAQ was down 346. When we were at the attorney's office, they said my timing was impeccable, and I felt like Maxwell Smart. Like, I don't know how I did it, but somehow it happened. But so many things have happened as a result of being the chairman of this great organization. I was asked to testify in Congress about the initiatives that Congress was looking to take on as it related to regulatory reform, specifically decimalization. That sounds like really ancient. For those that don't know, they used to say things like eighths and quarters and, put 16th on that trigger. And one of the things that our organization was concerned about was that if they narrowed the spread, which was the whole point of this big study called the Market 2000 study, that somehow that would change, the dynamic of Wall Street. And they were taking testimony from various market participants about that. We were very fortunate as an organization to be asked to opine on that. And the theory back then was that the study said that on the New York Stock Exchange, spreads between the bid and the ask were only an eighth. But on NASDAQ, they were a quarter. And that if they brought in decimalization, that would make the playing field so much easier, or fairer, for small issuers. And one of the things that I presented in my testimony to Congress was that, well, that's great, you're going to make the spread smaller, but no small cap stock for the most part is bought by anyone. It's sold to them. It's sold to them by a champion. It's sold to them by someone that wakes up in the morning and says, I think this client should hear about Microphone Inc. because it's new and it's different, and that if you kind of took the reason that market makers would want to make a market in illiquid securities away by making these penny spreads, that could have the potential of having a very chilling effect on the marketplace. And that was the basis of my testimony, and if anyone cares, you can go back and Google it, and it's on the web. And one of the things that I said was that we might reduce spreads, but you're going to increase volatility through the roof. And on my panel was Rick Ketchum, who is now the president of NASDAQ, and a couple of other notables, Archipelago at the time, and Instinet, which was another thing. And it was profound, and it was the position of this organization that, reducing spreads is going to create volatility because no one has to stand up for bids anymore. These champions wouldn't be there. And indeed, that absolutely happened. And as a result of that, I think the organization got a lot of credibility in Washington at the time. So much so that I was asked, I had sold my firm right in the middle of all this happening. So I actually only served 3 quarters as the chairman of the organization, and then Mike Fugel took over because I was no longer the broker dealer, and I was somewhat unemployed at the time, I guess. And because I had time on my hands, I got very friendly with a guy by the name of Jim Greenwood, who was a real champion of this organization and probably a good role model for what this organization might want to be thinking about going forward as you try to search for that purpose and search for that platform. Jim Greenwood was the congressman from my local district in Pennsylvania. I live in Yardley, Pennsylvania, north of Philadelphia. And it was told me at the time that if you're going to testify in front of a committee that your local congressman is on, you have to go and introduce yourself to that congressman, and then he should introduce you. It was just protocol. So that's what I did, and that started a very long friendship with Jim and I. And you probably know him best for all the Enron here was Ken Lay, Skilling. He was the white-haired guy that made Ken Lay and Skilling stand up and take the oath. Jim met me after my testimony on small cap issues. NIBA put in a lot of position papers that helped them formulate things. And then he introduced me to Bill Thomas, who was chairman of Ways and Means at the time, and Tozan, who was chairman of Commerce. And I wound up, on behalf of our organization, even though I wasn't really a chairman anymore, or really, quite frankly, that much of an active member, but consulted and carried the torch for the types of things that we wanted to happen. One of the things that I'm very proud of, although at the time it didn't go anywhere, it took a decade to have happen, we were able to, through House Ways and Means and Jim Greenwood, have H.R. 5455, a bill introduced to the Congress on November 6th of 2000. And the way the Hill newspaper reported it was, Republicans on Capitol Hill are launching a new assault on the dreaded capital gains tax with a bill that would give tax breaks to micro-cap investors. The bill, introduced by Jim Greenwood, would exclude from taxation investments in companies with market capitalizations of under $150 million. And that hopefully came back into life 10 years later with new tax legislation. So we really did have a voice back then. And then all of a sudden, anyone blew up, and Jim Greenwood found himself chairman of oversight. As Jim, I speak a lot, and I've shared the podium with Jim since, and he said that, I was elected to my office in Bucks County on a platform of dump trash from New York City into Bucks County, and he was a social worker. And all of a sudden, he was being faced with all these weighty issues that he was charged with looking on behalf of the Congress. So I used to meet with Jim and help him get a better understanding of some of the issues that he was looking at. And that led to a whole host of things, which then created, I was asked to chair a business advisory group to Congress when Enron and WorldCom were kind of going through everything. And I wanted to share with you what was in the press release from the Commerce Committee when they announced this committee. That in May of 2000, Ken Kamen, as NIBA chairman, presented testimony in a House committee hearing on U.S. capital markets restructuring initiatives. As a result of Ken's testimony, I learned of NIBA's involvement in the small business capital formation arena and its commitment to foster a healthy and vital small issuer marketplace. It is quite useful to learn that NIBA's comprehensive perspective on creating a market that is good for investors, issuers, market service providers, and the members of the regulatory community is valuable. Ken's involvement in the Business Advisory Group will be valuable in ensuring that the legislative and market reform measures will not unduly burden America's quality emerging companies. And we really did have a voice at the table back then. And, unfortunately, political demagoguery, to your point, might got in the way, because in the middle of all that, when WorldCom blew up, everyone ran to the microphones and it turned into Sarbanes-Oxley 2 weeks later. But we had already on my committee taken testimony from Jack Welch and John Bogle and a whole host of luminaries and that had a lot of very good ideas about the types of things like taxes and other things that might be considered. Because the big concern was the phrase special purpose entities was the big phrase of the day in the Enron world. And one of the comments that I made was, but do you realize that like a local plumber that might own his trucks in another company because of depreciation, that's a special purpose entity? And if you kind of outlaw that in your run to the podium and you paint the laws with a big roller instead of a paintbrush, you might actually be hurting business. And it was my involvement with this organization and being able to carry the name, the National, I have to throw it out again, the National, not the Regional Investment Banking Association, that really gave us a voice in Washington. And on a personal note, I have to say that those things, and off the credibility of leading this organization, launched a whole new career for me. I'm now in the asset management business. I'm on CNBC and Fox and all these shows quite a bit. One of the biggest credentials they show all the time is former chairman of the National Investment Banking Association. The reason I'm out around now is I have a book out called Reclaim Your Nest Egg from Bloomberg Press and John Wiley and Sons. And I got this book deal from them on the back of the fact that I'm in the media quite a bit, and that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the mail that was created by this organization. So when Emily asked if I would come and speak, the answer is absolutely yes, because it's really vital.